Margaret Bauer. I'm the literature coordinator in the English department, and I'm also the editor of the North Carolina Literary Review. And some things don't change. As I confess here every year, I'm also a writer groupie. Welcome to the 10th Eastern North Carolina Literary Homecoming. 10 years. How many of you were here the first year? Is it just Alex and me? No, a few more. Alex and me, it has changed a lot over the years. It's evolved, so it's a perfect thing for it. We started the first one. We're still here. Yeah, I should add, everybody, let's turn off our cell phones. This has evolved a lot since Maury York first had the idea of celebrating a gift to the North Carolina collection at Joyner Library, the gift of the Roberts collection of North Carolina fiction that's there. Tonight, we're going to celebrate another gift to North Carolina literature, and we'll get to that a little bit later. First, I want to add my thanks to everybody that has been mentioned already, as well as to a couple more people. Donna Kane for helping me keep up the website that NCLR's art director, Dana Gay, created for this event. And the whole NCLR staff, students, both last year's students and this year's students, and the faculty, most of whom volunteer their time to creating the issue. I want to specifically call out Johnny Bebo and Justine McLaren. Where are you? And wave. These two people particularly have helped us turn an issue, the 2013 issue of North Carolina Literary Review, into an event. And I'm always happy to have the opportunity then to meet the writers in person that I've been working with for a year now, putting together, as we put together that issue of NCLR, the 2013 issue. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the writers who are here, just so y'all can put a face with a name and all the good things you've been reading about these writers as we've been posting on Facebook and sending materials out to you. Beginning with tonight's musical entertainment, Jim Clark, poet and professor at Barton College. Jim, wave at everybody. Thank you so much, Jim, for the music. Jim's CDs are, by the way, available out there, I believe, for purchase. And accompanying Jim tonight is a surprise guest. His accompanist, Katie Adams, all the way from Greensboro. Thank you for coming and joining us, Katie. Also here from Greensboro is Dr. Angel Rashida Ahmad, poet and director of the creative writing program at North Carolina A&T. Where's Angel? There she is. From the faculty at UNC Chappell Hill is Paul Quadros, who will be arriving tomorrow morning, unless he surprised us and he's out here somewhere. I think he had another event tonight. And Maria de Guzman, founding director of the Latino Studies program. There's Maria. Maria is a photographer as well as a literary scholar. You can see an exhibit of her work with some of her collaborators at the library during tomorrow's program, and with her interview in NCLR 2013, by the way. Part-time resident of Chappell Hill now is Gustavo Perez Fremont. There he is, okay. Formerly of the faculty at Duke, but now at Columbia University in New York. You can read a sneak preview of his forthcoming book about being a Cuban in Mayberry in NCLR. And he means that with the greatest love, I promise. You should read the essay. It is a love story to North Carolina. And also joining us from New York is a Roxborough, North Carolina native, playwright and children's book writer, Calvin Alexander Ramsey. Where are you, Calvin? Oh. Calvin also divides his time. He goes between New York and Atlanta. We're glad to have you stop in between here. Another North Carolina native visiting us is Anna Jean Mayhew, living in Hillsborough from Charlotte. There she is. Author of the Wiley Award-winning novel, The Dry Grass of August, and a new novel that she'll read from us tomorrow at lunch. And joining us from her hometown of Charlotte is Irania Macias Patterson. Where is she? Oh, there she is. She's originally from Venezuela, but we're going to claim her as a North Carolina writer now because she's been living in Charlotte, and she is the author of 2 bilingual books for children. So you'll hear a lot more about all of these writers during tomorrow's panels, workshops, and readings. So now let me introduce to you Wiley Cash, who will speak to us tonight about our honoree's role in his own writing and read to us from his first novel, A Land More Kind Than Home, and his forthcoming novel, The Dark Road to Mercy. Do I have that title right? Kind of, okay, you can correct me. Wait, not yet. Let me tell a little bit about Wiley. I met Wiley when I was visiting my family in Louisiana and went over to the University of Louisiana in Lafayette to give a talk. A couple of my former professors remarked to me that I had to meet their star graduate student, a young North Carolina writer there studying with Ernest Gaines. They wanted to make sure to introduce him to the editor of the North Carolina Literary Review, who just happened to be an alum. At the time, I believe they thought they were doing him the favor. We published North Carolina writers in NCLR after all. But as it turns out, I was the one who was getting a sneak preview of a future North Carolina literary star to look out for. And so I noticed when Wiley's first novel, A Land More Kind Than Home, called a mesmerizing first novel in the New York Times, started winning awards. Even the Crime Writers Association award, and he didn't even know he'd written a crime novel. It also received the Southeastern Independent Booksellers Association award for fiction and was on the New York Times bestseller list. Wiley is now working on his 3rd novel while he waits the publication of his 2nd novel early in 2014. And somewhere between the accolades that's starting to come in for the first book and the 2 pending books, when I saw that Wiley was reading at my favorite bookstore in Asheville one weekend that I was there, I decided to go see how he was doing since I'd met him as a graduate student. And I can tell you from what I saw there, we are in for a treat tonight. Wiley.
I grew up in North Carolina, and I left here in 2010 to go down to Lafayette, Louisiana for graduate school. And I've been out of North Carolina for 10 years. I stayed in Louisiana for 5 years, and I moved to West Virginia for 5 years, and I taught there in West Virginia, and just this past week, my wife and I moved to Wilmington, North Carolina. So after 10 years away, now we are back. So this is my homecoming in many ways, and it's a real honor to be here. I've read a lot of North Carolina literary reviews, and I remember I would get the issue, and it would have the North Carolina Literary Homecoming in it, and the pictures of all the writers and all these people that I admired and looked up to, and I would read it and think, oh, I'd love to visit that. I'd love to go one year. Here I am, like, here speaking to all of you, and it's bizarre and strange and wonderful, and this experience has never stopped surprising me for a moment. For a very long time, this novel is important. This novel is important because it captures this moment in Elizabethan history, or this moment in, such and such history. But they're novels of ideas. They're important because they talk about politics and culture and all of these things. But I'm One of You Forever is the first novel I read where I knew who the characters were, and it was a novel of ideas. It was the first novel that I read, and I knew those people, and it talked about physics and the nature of storytelling and how art works and how stories capture our lives. And it was the first book I read where I said, gosh, this is a book that's, I know these people and it's smart. This is a real book. And it was a wonderful experience for me to have. And so I kind of learned how to be a North Carolina writer by reading North Carolina writers. And when I finished my first novel, A Land More Kind Than Home, I thought, well, I guess I better get some North Carolina writers to say this is not a terrible book. Maybe somebody will pay attention to it. And so the first letter I wrote was to Fred Chappell. We had a mutual friend who I begged for his address, and he gave me Fred's address. I apologize for that. It cost me $20. The price has since gone up if you want to blur from Fred Chappell. I'll meet you out back after the event. So I wrote him a note, and I said, Dear Mr. Chappell, I'm a longtime fan of yours. I read a ton of your books. I've just finished a novel set in North Carolina. I don't have a publisher, but I wonder if you'd look at it and maybe consider giving me a blurb. And he wrote back and said, Dear Wiley, if it's my kind of book, maybe I can say something nice about it. And I was like, straightforward, to the point. Somebody mentioned Wendell Berry earlier. I invited him to a graduate conference in Louisiana to be the keynote speaker. Wendell Berry wrote back a note that said, "Dear Wiley, I've grown tired of listening to speeches and even more tired of giving them." Wendell Berry. So that might have been the best letter I've ever received. Fred's is definitely second. And what he didn't know at the time is that one of my narrators in A Land More Kind Than Home is named Jess, in honor of Jess Kurtman from I Am One of You Forever. It was a small nod, but it was a nod that I consciously and emotionally made. And what he also didn't know is that one of the scenes in A Land More Kind Than Home is a direct ripoff of some of his writing that I'm going to read tonight, actually. He has a wonderful short story called it's like flash fiction called Children of Strikers. And it's about these two children walking alongside a road in the shadow of this mill, and their parents are back home striking. And they're involved in the strike. And it touches on the desolation of these children without these children necessarily appreciating or grasping the true desolation of their lives. And this is a moment where a girl bends down and picks up a baby's foot and tells the little boy walking with her that she found a real baby's foot. It's a doll's foot. And the little boy, his imagination runs wild. And he says, "You ain't so much," he said. "I seen better." But his voice, though resentful, was not bitter. They walked on a space and she began to relent. "It's a foot," she said. "What do you mean? What kind of foot?" "It's a baby's foot." "No," he glared at her. "I ain't believing that. You can believe just whatever little thing you want to. I ain't believing you found no baby's foot. Let me see it." "No." "Well then, you ain't got nothing. How big is it?" "It's real tiny." And so eventually they go on, and she says, "You gotta give me something." He says, "Ain't that awful to think about? A poor little baby. Come on and show it to me. I gotta see that baby's foot." "What do you give me?" They marched along, and he struck a mournful air. "Nothing," he said at last. "I ain't got nothing to give." She stopped and looked at him, surveyed him head to toe with a weary satisfaction. "No, I guess you ain't," she said. "You ain't got a thing." And that always stayed with me, just the moment where these children, where their imaginations are running wild, and they come to terms with the fact that they really, honestly, don't have a thing. And so I stole that. I had a professor in college who said, "Bad writers copy, good writers steal." So I thought, well, I'll go ahead and start. This is actually a cut scene from A Land More Kind Than Home. This is on the morning where the older brother is smothered in healing service. And they leave this Sunday school lesson. These two boys, Jess, who's my narrator here, his older friend Joe Bill, who's kind of a bully, and Jess's older brother named Stump, who's 13 and doesn't speak. And so they're walking along these railroad tracks after Sunday school. They had Sunday school down by the river, and they're talking about the lesson that they've just learned. "We climb up the bank and follow the train tracks away from the river. We'd get in big trouble if Miss Lyle saw us taking the tracks across the bridge, so we follow them the other way so she can't see us. Nobody can see us here. The sun is bright and hot on the tracks. I can smell the wood and the tracks feel like it could burn my hand, but I reach down and touch it anyway. I wish I had me a penny," Joe Bill says. "I'd lay it down on the track and get it all smoothed out, and then I'd make me a necklace out of it." "That'd be neat," I say. "I wish me and Stump had pennies too, and I tell myself to remember to ask Daddy for one next Sunday before we come to church." "How would you get a necklace through it?" I ask. "I'd probably just shoot a hole in it with my brother's BB gun," Joe Bill says. Joe Bill's brother is old, and he's got a BB gun, and he lets me and Joe Bill shoot cans, and sometimes he shoots birds. Mama told me she'd wear me out if she heard about me shooting any birds. My daddy's got a shotgun behind the door in the bedroom, and I'm not quite old enough to touch it. He told me when I turned 10, me and him would go out and take some target practice. Mama said she didn't think that shooting a gun was a good thing to teach me, but Daddy just laughed and aimed a make-believe rifle at her behind when she wasn't looking. We walk down the tracks, and I start wondering how far we can go before somebody misses us. They have preaching after Sunday school, and I know nobody will be looking for us until it's over. "How far you reckon we can walk?" I asked Joe Bill. "I don't know," he says. "Maybe to Asheville if we had us a packed lunch and some water." "Is that 100 miles?" I asked. "It ain't that far," Joe Bill says. "It's far, but it ain't that far." And then he says, me and my brother found a dead baby in the woods one time by the tracks on the other side of the river. No, you didn't, I say. Yes, we did, Joe Bill says. It was hid in some weeds by the train tracks. My brother went down there and picked it up. It didn't have a head on it, so my brother just put it back where he found it and went on home. You're lying, I said. No, I'm not. I bet it was a baby doll, I say. I bet your brother found a baby doll and he told you it was real. I bet he played a trick on you. It looked real from where I was standing, Joe Bill says. We should go and look for it, see if it's still there, I say. It's too far from here, Joe Bill says. I bet it was a baby doll, I say again. It might have been, Joe Bill says. I don't remember. Our shadows walk along beside us and lay across the tracks and reach down the bank to the edge of the woods. Stump's shadow is the longest because he's taller than Joe Bill, and Joe Bill's taller than me. I figure we've been walking too long already, and I stop walking and act like I'm looking at something way off in the woods so Joe Bill won't think I'm scared of getting in trouble. How long do you reckon we've been gone, I ask. I don't know, he says. He doesn't turn around but just keeps on walking down the tracks. You reckon we better turn around? I'm not going back, he says. I'm walking to Asheville. You can go back if you want to, but I'm not stopping. You tell my folks where I'm going. You're going to get in trouble, I'll holler after him. I don't care, he hollers back. I look over at Stump. We better go on back, I say. I turn around and Stump follows me. We walk for a piece until I hear Joe Bill hollering for us to stop. Hold up, he says. I turn around and see him on his knees on the track with his back to us. His shoulders are shaking back and forth like he's worrying something out of the ground. He stands up and holds up something for us to see, but he's too far away and I can't tell what it is. He comes jogging up the tracks toward us, and me and Stump stand there and wait for him. Check this out, he says when he gets closer. He's panting and his face is sweaty. In his hand, he's holding a rusty old railroad spike. This keeps the track held down, he says. I know what it does, I tell him. Can I see it? He gives it to me, and I hold it for a minute and turn it over in my hand. It feels heavy and rough and warm. Pretty neat, huh? Joe Bill says. I think you better put it back, I say. No way, Joe Bill says. Finders keepers. What if the rail comes loose and a train runs off the tracks? That would be your fault. Joe Bill looks down at the spike in his hand, and I can tell he's thinking about putting it back now. I'll have to bring me a sledgehammer to get it back in, he says. We'll have to wait until next Sunday. You might can hit it with the big rock, I tell him. No, I have to use me a sledgehammer. Me and Stump and Joe Bill walk down the tracks back toward the river, and Joe Bill carries his spike. He lets me carry it for a while, and then he asks for it back. He shows off and carries it like a marching baton and high-steps it up the track. I laugh, and Stump laughs too. Joe Bill stops high-stepping, and me and Stump catch up with him. I wonder where he was going when he went through Jericho, Joe Bill says. Jesus? Yeah, I wonder where he was going, Joe Bill says again. I don't know, I say. Maybe Miss Lyle will tell us. Maybe she will, he says. Then he says, I bet he was on his way to the cross, and that's why he stopped to rest. I bet he told old Zacchaeus where he was going, I say. I bet they used one of these to nail him to the cross, Joe Bill says. He opens his hand and puts the point of the spike on it. I look down at his hand and think about the spike going right through it. I think about all the blood that would come squirting out. I bet that would hurt bad, I say. I watch Joe Bill press it hard into his hand and turn it back and forth. He wrinkles up his face. When he's done, there's a brown mark on his hand. He looks at it and keeps walking. And then he hauls back his arm and throws the spike into the woods. I hear it crash through some branches. Why'd you do that, I ask him. He wipes the brown spot off his hand. I don't feel like carrying it no more, he says. Then he says, don't tell nobody what I did. I won't, I say. So that's my Fred Chappell inspired section of A Land More Kind Than Home that ended up on the cutting room floor. Not because it was Fred Chappell inspired, but I think that you have to, I really think that when you're writing and you're trying to do good, honest work, the more you cut, the more honest it is, and the closer to the emotional life of your characters you'll become. So I thought I would just read just a little from my novel that'll be out January 28th called This Dark Road to Mercy. It's not the dark road, it's this specific road. This very specific road, dark road to mercy. Putting this in it felt more southern. It felt like a hymnal, like this dark road of mercy that I've been on. And so this will be out January 28th, and this is set in Gastonia, which is my hometown, which, you know, most everybody here is from North Carolina. So when I say Gastonia, you're free to giggle I've been all over the state, and every time I say I'm from Gastonia, people are like, One time I was in Shelby, and I said, I'm from Gastonia, and they laughed, and I just wanted to say, this is Shelby. You live in Shelby. All right. I was talking to a guy from the Netherlands, and he said, you know, it's important. He said, people talk about the Netherlands as if they're all the same. We have small village by small village, and we're like, don't go over to that village. They're crazy in that village. But we just say the Netherlands. It's all, everybody's the same there. But this novel is set in 1998, and it's about a washed-up minor league baseball player who kidnaps his two daughters from a foster home and tries to go on the run. And one of the narrators is a 12-year-old girl named Easter Quilby. She's the oldest of the two girls who gets kidnapped, and she knows her dad is a loser, but she really doesn't want him to be. And I thought I would read a section from the book, just 40 or 50 pages. My panel doesn't start till 9. I don't know what y'all have to do. AM. But this is a scene in the book where she is in the group home and she overhears her father. He has shown back up in their lives, and he is trying to get them, even though he's, you'll learn, signed away his parental rights. And the truth is, unbeknownst to Easter, he has discovered some stolen money hidden in a wall of a house he is renovating, and he takes the money and tries to steal the girls back, which he eventually does. Saturday morning after breakfast, Ruby, that's her younger sister, Ruby hung out with some of the little kids and watched cartoons in the TV room. I stayed in our room and stared at the wall with Nancy Drew's The Case of the Disappearing Diamond open on my lap, trying to figure out all the things Marcus could be thinking. Marcus is her boyfriend. I knew I wouldn't be able to concentrate enough to solve the mystery with Nancy if I was just going to sit there and think about something else while listening to the little kids laugh at cartoons a few rooms over. So I climbed off my bed and walked toward the office to ask Miss Crawford if she'd sign me onto one of the computers. There were 2 computers in the study room for playing games and getting on the World Wide Web. I didn't ever have any reason to get on the web, but I liked hearing the loud, fuzzy sound of the phone line dialing. I thought that voice was pretty neat, even though I'd never gotten an email myself. I never had a reason to send one either. I like getting on the computer for one thing only, Oregon Trail. I'd name 2 of the pioneers after me and Ruby and play for hours. And once the rest of them died off, I'd pretend that it was just me and her in that wagon, shooting at turkeys and deers and floating across rivers on our way out west. I walked past the computer room and peeked in to make sure one of the computers was open. A boy named Travis, who was a few years younger than me, was sitting at one of them. I couldn't tell what he was looking at, but he had on earphones and I could hear rap music playing from where I stood. He nodded his head to the beat. Hopefully, somebody wouldn't claim that other computer before I could get back, and I walked down the hall to the office. It was through a door just off the kitchen. When I got closer, I could hear a man's voice, and I stopped in the kitchen and listened at the door. Miss Crawford was talking too, and she was being stern with somebody. Her voice sounded just like her. Skinny and tough. She was old and had gray hair, but all of us knew she meant business, and nobody messed with her. Listen, she said, I ain't the person you need to be talking to. A file cabinet slid open. I heard her take something out and slide the drawer closed. But they're my kids, the man's voice said. I recognized it immediately. It was Wade. He sounded nervous and scared, completely different from how he'd acted when we'd seen him at the baseball field the week before. Not in the eyes of the court they ain't, Miss Crawford said. Not legally. Their files say you gave them up in 1996 and you don't get them back just because their mama died. You can't just show up after school like you did or come over here on a Saturday morning and just try to see them. But when I signed that paper, there was some kind of provision that gave me visitation rights. I remember that. I remember that from when I signed it. There might have been, Miss Crawford said. That's something you're going to have to ask the judge about. Or you can contact their guardian ad litem. His name's Brady Weller. Here's his card. When I heard Brady Weller's name, I immediately pictured him. Me and Ruby had met him a couple times. The first time was the morning we woke up in the home after we'd moved in the night before. He was waiting for us in the living room with Miss Crawford. She told us who he was, and then she led us to the dining room table and left us alone. Brady was tall with short blonde hair and bright blue eyes. He was older than Mom, but as soon as I saw him, I couldn't help but wish that she'd been friends with guys like Brady Weller instead of the guys she ran around with. He set a couple of folders on the table in front of him, but he didn't open them. I think he would have smiled at us if we'd been anybody else, but he seemed to know we probably wouldn't feel like smiling back. How do y'all like your new room, he asked. leaning forward and putting his hands on the table. Me and Ruby just sat there staring at the table. But then she looked up at me, and then she looked at Brady. "Our mom's dead," she finally said, her eyes starting to fill up with tears. Brady reached out and put his hand on her shoulder. "I know," he said, "and I was awfully sorry to hear that. But this is a good place to be. Miss Crawford's real nice, and she's real excited about y'all being here. And I'm going to be with you every step of the way." Wade had gotten quiet on the other side of the door, and he must have been looking down at Brady's card. "Why do I even have to call anybody?" he asked. "They're my kids." "I know that, Mr. Chesterfield," Miss Crawford said, "but there's just nothing else I can do for you." I imagine Wade staring at Miss Crawford with that look in his eyes that begged her to do anything she could to help him. She must have seen the look I had in mind, because she said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Chesterfield, but this is just the way things have to be." "I get it," he finally said, "but I don't have a lot of time on my hands." "I understand. So just let me see him today," he said. "I'm not asking for much, just a few minutes, that's all." Miss Crawford interrupted him. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do that. I probably shouldn't tell you what I'm about to tell you, but I want you to understand this situation. We've been in contact with the girls' grandparents in Alaska, and they're working really hard to adopt these girls. And so far, they've done everything right, everything the courts asked of them." "Well, that's just great," Wade said. "You need to know those people had never laid eyes on these girls, not once in their whole lives. But me, I'm here. I want them. They're my girls." "I understand," Miss Crawford said, "but that's not how the law works." "I know how the law works," Wade said, "and I know it never works for people like me." He was quiet for a second, and then his voice came out in a whisper. "You gonna send my girls to Alaska?" "I don't know. Maybe, but I can't say for sure. I ain't no kind of position to make any promises." I heard the floor creak as Wade walked toward the door that led out to the porch. I heard him put his hand on the knob and turn it, and then I heard the sound the door made when he opened it. But then I knew that he was just standing there because I didn't hear it close. "I want you to know I was tricked into signing that piece of paper," he said. "I never would have signed it if I'd known I was giving them up." "I understand," Miss Crawford said, but Wade shut the door, and she didn't say nothing else. I knew exactly which piece of paper Wade was talking about signing. I'd found it in Mom's room after we'd all come home from the courthouse. It was the last time I'd seen Wade. Mom had made me and Ruby go to court with her, even though I was only 9 years old and Ruby wasn't nothing before. I remember her saying, "I want you both to see what your daddy's willing to do if you ask him nice enough." Wade was waiting on us when we got to the courtroom. His eyes were swollen and red. He rocked back and forth on his feet, and finally he just sat down in a chair and waited for things to get started. Me and Ruby sat with Mom. She wouldn't let us go over and say nothing to Wade, even though he kept looking over at us and sniffing real loud like he was trying to get us to look at him. We hadn't seen him in a while, and Mom acted like she didn't even see him now. He tried to dress up and look nice by wearing a button-down shirt, but it still had the crease marks where it had been folded at the store. It looked like he'd unwrapped it and just put it right on. I can't quite remember what happened next, and I can't quite remember what the judge said, but I do remember watching Mom and Wade go up where the judge sat. Mom walked right up there like she couldn't wait to hear what he had to say, but Wade just shuffled his feet and moved so slow that I thought he might not ever make it. The three of them whispered back and forth, and every now and then Wade would turn his head and look over at me and Ruby to try and get our attention. I watched him rock back and forth on his heels, and a couple of times he rocked too far and had to grab onto something to keep from falling over. One thing I do remember is watching them sign that piece of paper. And I remember watching as they gave Mom a copy of it. As soon as she got that piece of paper in her hands, it was over. We were out the door and walking back down the street away from the courthouse and away from downtown. She didn't tell Wade bye or give the judge a thank you or nothing. Just gone. Me and Ruby couldn't hardly keep up with her. She put that piece of paper in her pocketbook and took me and Ruby by the hand. "It's just us now," she said. "All we got to worry about is ourselves and nobody else." When we got home, Mom took that piece of paper into her room and shut the door. A few minutes later, I heard her crying. That night, while she was in the kitchen getting Ruby something to eat, I snuck into her bedroom and found the paper folded up on her bedside table. I picked it up and read all that I could. Across the top it said, "Termination of parental rights." Farther down it said, "In signing this document, I, Wade Chesterfield, hereby relinquish my parental rights to Easter Renee Quilby and Ruby Justice Quilby, both minors." Relinquish. I had no idea what that word meant, but I saw where Mom had signed, and I recognized Wade's signature right by hers. I folded up that piece of paper and left it exactly where I'd found it, and I snuck out of Mom's room and went into our bedroom. My spelling book was in my backpack,
and I got it out and flipped to the back where there was a dictionary that we use to look up our vocabulary words. I found it. Relinquish, to give up, leave, abandon. That sounded just about right to me. That night, after Mom had gone to bed and Ruby was asleep, I crept down the hallway to find the one thing Wade had left behind in our house. I opened the closet by the front door just as quiet as I could, and I picked up the bag and slung it over my shoulder and carried it into the bathroom. I closed the door behind me and flipped on the light, and then I looked under the sink and found a bottle of nail polish remover and a bunch of cotton balls. I sit on the floor with my back against the tub, opened up that bag, and one by one, I took out all those old baseballs that Wade had signed back when he thought he was going to be famous. And I used Mom's nail polish remover and tried my hardest to take his name off every single one of them.